There's something strange in the neighborhood, and it's not the thing everybody's talking about. The upcoming Ghostbusters film, which is currently in production, is something that I have debated about weighing in on for a while. A little bit of context, the original Ghostbusters is my all-time favorite movie. I do recognize that to a certain degree that is nostalgia, but I will argue the merits of this movie to anyone until my dying day. All of that having been said, I am not looking forward to the new Ghostbusters film. Now, a big part of why I have not talked about this project up until this point is that the conversation has been pretty much dominated by the fact that the new one has an all-female cast. The people complaining about that and the backlash against those complaints, it's all anybody has been talking about, and I did not want my input on this project just to be labeled with, "You're just mad because it's girls now." And honestly, that might still happen, but I'm hoping that we're far enough along in terms of this overall thing and in terms of talking about it that I can voice my concerns and why I am not looking forward to this and why I'm nervous, and not have it just get tossed aside with that same group. Ultimately, for me, the problem comes down to one huge issue, which is, why is this a reboot? Again, I need to stress this very strongly. I do not have a problem with the fact that it's not the original cast, nor do I have a problem with the new cast being of a different gender. But I do have a problem with the old Ghostbusters universe, which is a very well-established one at this point, being completely wiped clean when I have yet to hear a truly viable or valid reason for doing that. Why should 2 films, 2 cartoon series, a bunch of comic books, and just the general pop culture absorption of what Ghostbusters is suddenly not count anymore? I suppose first I should note what I think are generally the reasons that are valid for why you would reboot a property. The first reason would be if the current series that you've got is simply too tainted. This is kind of the Batman and Robin scenario. Now, that film left such a bad taste in everybody's mouth that really the only way to move forward with Batman on film was to wipe that away and start from scratch. Now, as much as I personally may not care for the second Ghostbusters film, I don't think that's the case here, and I don't think you can argue that it is. There's still a very great and very strong love for these characters. I mean, that's why this movie's happening at all. Now, another reason to reboot a franchise is the age of the actors, and this would think of, say, the Star Trek reboot. That was a case, the actors they were too old to keep going. The only way to move forward is to start over and get young people to embody these characters so that you can basically restart the timeline again. Again, that's also really not the case here. I mean, up until Harold Ramis dying, this was going to be a sequel. Now, yes, I understand he's dead, and the actors are older, but just look at the fact that we're not actually dealing with the same characters. We're dealing with the same concept and a whole new set of characters. Now, it may actually turn out that each of these female characters is an analog for one of the pre-existing male Ghostbusters, but even if that is the case, they're just rebuilding off the archetype. They're not really rebooting the characters. And doing that sort of younger reboot for characters is really only necessary if the characters themselves are absolutely intrinsic to the central concept and it cannot move forward without those same characters. And again, obviously that's not the case. We have a whole new set of characters here. Another reason to reboot a franchise is if you want to take it in a direction that the existing material simply does not allow you to go in. Maybe you've got new ideas that just inherently go against the canon of established films so far. Maybe the tone is just not in keeping with what has happened before. This would kind of be like the Casino Royale example. I mean, James Bond had been recast several times up to that point, and none of those have really been a reboot, but this was a case where they wanted to go back, tell the story of his first mission, but not have it be a period piece set in the 60s, so that was the reason for that reboot. What they wanted to do could not be done with the existing timeline and story that had been established. Now, while we don't really know all the ins and outs of the story that's going to be told in this new Ghostbusters, everything that's been talked about with the people behind it has been very emphatically saying that the tone is going to be the same as in the previous film. So again, no need for a reboot there. Finally, the last reason to reboot is when a film is an adaptation of an existing property. Then you can make the argument that the reboot is being truer to the source material, or maybe is going to emphasize aspects of the source material that were not done in the previous adaptation. Again, James Bond kind of falls under this a little bit. But again, that does not apply to Ghostbusters because this was a film first. This was not an adaptation of existing material. There's been a franchise worth of material since then, but it was always a film first. Now, coming back to what I said before about the fact that we don't know a ton about this story, but even with as little as we know, I don't feel that having an entire new team of Ghostbusters is enough to justify a reboot unto itself. I mean, why can't they just be the next generation of Ghostbusters? Why can't they just be a separate franchise of Ghostbusters? I mean, Dan Aykroyd's original concept for the thing was actually that they would be very much like firemen, and there would be fire stations and, stations of Ghostbusters all over the city, all over the country. So why can't this just be a different group? Heck, you can even keep the fact that they're going to make their own gear. It got established in Ghostbusters 2 that supernatural activity waxes and wanes. I mean, at the start of Ghostbusters 2, things have been completely quiet to the point that the Ghostbusters basically have been out of business for the past few years. Now, I actually don't think that was a particularly good idea story-wise in Ghostbusters 2, but now that that already has been established, it's now perfectly reasonable that the original Ghostbusters would have retired and that this is a new group coming up. And maybe this new group is making their own stuff, their own proton packs and so forth, based off of maybe older broken down models or just what they understand the original Ghostbusters were using. And that idea would actually even work really well with the shots that we've seen that have been released of the proton packs and of Ecto-1 and so forth. It's all very much strongly the aesthetic of the original films, but it's not quite exactly that. I mean, really, it looks like what someone who maybe had a blueprint of a proton pack, but not the actual thing itself, would have put together. And if they were doing this instead of rebooting, the use of the exact same logo would actually make sense, because they'd just be reappropriating it for this new generation of this new franchise of Ghostbusters, as opposed to having it be a completely different continuity, but they just coincidentally happen to use the exact same logo. I mean, heck, I'm pretty sure they're even bringing back Slimer, who's iconic as heck, but is in no way vital to the storytelling. There's all this emphasis whenever the director talks and whenever they release these publicity stills that, look, see, it's just like you remember, but if it's just like I remember, why are you rebooting it? Why are we ignoring all the stuff that came before? Generally, the point of a reboot, as I've laid out, is to go with a new direction, do something different, but you're not. You're emphasizing how much it's the same. Look, the only way that I can think of that the story might demand that this thing be rebooted is if they're completely restructuring the rules and the way that ghosts and the technology function. But I honestly can't even bring myself to believe that that's going to be the case, because the rules were so loosely defined in the first place that if you just overlay the correct techno jargon over it, you can do anything you want. Look, I am just really infuriated that it's a reboot and they're getting rid of the old stuff, because there's nothing that I have seen about any aspect of this that justifies throwing out the old continuity. In fact, I find myself keep thinking if they were keeping the old stuff, it would save a whole bunch of time. Now instead, they're gonna have to dedicate screen time to explaining the ghosts, the traps, the proton packs, when by all indications, they're not doing anything new or different with any of those things. Again, let me stress, I don't care that it's a new team. I love the old team, but I don't need them to be in it. Even before Harold Ramis died, I didn't need to see them old running around chasing ghosts. I mean, Indiana Jones 4 kind of proved to me that that's not a good idea. I don't care that it's a team of women, and just having a new team, it does not require anything in terms of race or gender. You can go any direction with it. I don't care that Chris Hemsworth is the secretary. Heck, when I heard that was the first bit of news about this movie that actually kind of made me smile, because I thought that's kind of funny as a concept. I don't need the exact version of Ghostbusters that I grew up with to be put up on screen for my own nostalgic purposes. I honestly would rather they would just leave the franchise alone altogether, but what I really haven't heard is a single reason for why my version and my film that I love shouldn't count anymore. I haven't heard the argument. I know that the old movie doesn't suddenly go away and it doesn't exist, but it's still kind of sweeping it under the rug and going, yeah, we're not going to talk about that anymore. And I could deal with that, and I would not be so frustrated and so exasperated if anybody give me a reason, a necessary reason why this is a reboot and not a continuation, because I haven't heard it. And until I hear it, I can't possibly get excited about a new Ghostbusters. So that's it. That's my argument. Do you think there is a reason to be rebooting this instead of having it just be a continuation with a new team? If you do believe there is a reason, please share something down in the comments and let's talk about it. But until next time, this council is adjourned.